Hey, after taking a month off, I'm back. What did I get to replace my old car? Stay tuned, we're going to talk all about it today. All right, let's check out this party trick. All right, so what you have here is the 2023 Kia EV6 GT in runway red. So I'm going to get in the car. It's really hot out, and I'll tell you about my purchasing experience and what I love about the car after about a month of ownership, and also my worries and some of the things that weren't as smooth with the car so far. All right, so here's the story. I started looking for cars to replace my Mach-E back in about May of this year. And I looked at a whole wide range of options, including going back to an ICE car, looking at other EVs, even looking at brand T, although I didn't look for that too long. And also deciding to wait and keep my Mach-E because always, like especially with EVs, there's always something new and better, allegedly better, coming out. I decided, however, that I wanted to try and see if there was an existing EV already out that I can buy. And the reason why is because I wanted to try and buy a car that at least was out in its platform, in its powertrain, in a lot of the other things about the car or the platform it was based on for at least about a year. That way, at least you had like some of the first year niggles and kind of problems that people have being an early adopter kind of taken care of by the time I get the car. I know the experience in the past of being like almost one of the first to get a car or a trim level or a model, and I wanted to try and avoid that if I could. So I looked all around and I started test driving, and I came across my local Kia dealer, and I hesitated. I wanted to try the eGMP platform. I was tending more towards the Genesis GV60, but I thought it was overpriced for what it was. I also wasn't like particularly super excited about the handling. I thought that its acceleration was certainly good, but I thought the suspension was kind of tuned relatively soft, and a lot of the interior, while it looked great, was a little bit on the plasticky side, and especially when you get up to like the $70,000 MSRP range, I didn't think it kind of matched the price class it was going for. Anyway, so I came across the Kia dealer and I was like, this EV6 does look fantastic, and the GT seemed to get really, really good reviews, mostly among the European journalists, which were there for the launch of the EV6 in Europe, which happened late last year. So I decided to give it a test drive and to check it out. And I was pleasantly surprised, actually more accurately blown away. I thought the acceleration was fantastic. I thought the interior looked great. I thought the fit and finish was much higher than I thought it would be. And I also thought not only the acceleration, but the handling was decent. Like I thought it was like legit, like good stuff. So I started thinking this might be the next car for me and for the family. And so I started then looking around for pricing on the EV6, especially with the internet. You can look across the entire country if you want for the exact color, make, model, trim level, and see where the inventory is and what the prices are. And so I started doing that. You know, the Bay Area had pretty firm prices at around 60K, if not more than 60K. My local dealers here were trying to smoke crack and charge me 65 to 70K for a market adjustment. I said I didn't know what market they were in, but certainly not the market that I was interested in. Anyway, I looked and I found cars down in LA that there were plenty of stock of, and some dealers really willing to deal. And so basically, in the end, I used cargurus.com. This is not a paid endorsement for them, but used them, found a dealer down in Huntington Beach, California, which is south of LA, that actually had an EV6 GT that was listed on their site for around $55,000 to $56,000. It had a couple hundred miles on it, around 500 to 600 miles, but it was listed as being new. So I called them up and talked to them and found out the sordid history of the car. Turns out it was an unwound purchase. So someone purchased the car right when the GT started coming in January. And they obviously had either bad credit or lied on their credit application in some way, but the deal was unwound a week after they purchased the car, and they had to bring it back to the dealer. The car then was, I think, the sales manager's car that he drove around in for about 400 miles while they tried to sell it. And they kept on lowering the price and lowering the price and lowering the price. And by the time I got there, it was around $6,000 off. And then on top of that, I learned that Kia was giving a lease incentive on the car. And the lease incentive was basically this backdoor loophole that Congress put in place with the Inflation Act, which allows any company purchasing a car to be able to get the $7,500 tax rebate, even if the car and the person otherwise was not eligible for it. So if you lease a car, the lessor gets the car and they get the tax break. And in my case, they passed along that $7,500 to me. So the amount that I financed in the lease was actually minus $7,500. So I got this car for like $13,000 off of MSRP. Fantastic deal. So I had them send me all the papers beforehand because they're about 5, 6, 7 hours away if I drove there and about an hour's flight away. Had them send me all the papers, gave them a deposit. I told them if there was any funny business, I would be walking out the dealer and getting right back on the Southwest flight.
Can I help you with something? Hold it! One more step and we're walking!
Showed up early Sunday morning. Sure enough, the deal was exactly as they told me. And an hour later, I was driving back up on a road trip with the car back home. All right, so here's what I love about the car. I don't mean for this to be an extensive, like, full-on review of the car, because there are plenty of automotive journalists and YouTubers that have done reviews of this car at this point. You can go look at them. They're all pretty accurate, but they only have the car for about a day or a week at most. They don't get to live with the car. And so I wanted to give you my impressions after living with the car for about a month and a half now. All right, so the first thing I love about this car is absolutely the performance. The reason to get the EV6 GT over other trims of the EV6 or other eGMP cars like the GV60 from Genesis or the Ioniq 5 or the Ioniq 6 now is really this electric powertrain. This car has the business. This has the most performance right now that you can get and purchase of any of the GMP cars. So it has big beefy front motor, big beefy back motor, modified battery parts to handle all of that performance. And it also offers all the benefits that other eGMP cars have of very fast charging, of really great interior space and packaging. But the reason to get this car, and I'd say my number one thing I love about the car, is absolutely the performance, both in the straight line. So the car, does not give up. It just has torque like a freight train. Even when people say like, oh, it derates after a certain SOC to get maximum power, you have to be above 80 or 70% state of charge. Unless you're really doing a drag race or a YouTube car video where you have the car for a week and you want to get maximum draggy times, this car above like 20, 30% state of charge is just always there, always on it in terms of having any kind of torque to get out of any situation, to have fun from any stoplight, to take any on-ramp at literally superhuman speed or superhero speed. So just far and away, just blown away coming from the Mach-E and the 5 seconds of fun and derating you have. and just randomly derating whenever it feels like it. You just don't have that with this car. And that's what impressed me before I bought it, and that's what has continued to impress me. Okay, that's like the first thing. The second thing I would say, though, is definitely the interior packaging. I really think this car is fantastic in terms of the front space and the rear space it offers, and the differentiation in the eGMP cars and what they did with this interior. This interior they really made to look and feel special, much more so than my previous car. If you look at the seats, they're all outfitted in suede imitation Alcantara. They have green piping, acid green piping and stitching, and the steering wheel as well has green stitching, and it all matches up with the GT button that's here. It all matches up also with the brakes that you have that are also fitted in acid green. The rear seats itself also are Alcantara, and the amount of space in the rear is really, really well done. This has the wheelbase of a Telluride with the outside dimensions of a RAV4 essentially. So really great use of packaging. That's number two. And I'd say the third thing that really has impressed me living with the car over and over again is the configurability of the car. The drive modes in this car really mean something. So there are a total of 5 drive modes in the EV6 GT. There's normal, which is the default mode that happens or that turns on when you turn on the car. That's kind of a comfort mode. The suspension is in the softest setting. The motors are not spooled up to give you a ton of power. It does give you a normal amount of power. If you really push it into the floor, it's going to give you the full beans or at least a lot of the power. But it's definitely a normal amount of power that's just fine for around the town driving. And if I'm in like super chill moods or I have my family in the car, especially my wife, I'll just put it in, leave it in normal mode and things will be really good. It also has a sport mode, which is just a little bit more, a little bit up. Suspension's a little bit tighter and throttle response is better. It's basically the same amount of power as the GT line, which is the one trim level lower on the EV6. Still, for any normal car, it's fantastic. It's going to be probably about a 0 to 60 in 4.5, 4.7 seconds. Suspension is not that harsh. You will get more body roll. You'll get more understeer in my impression. The regen won't be as strong, but that's also a really good mode. It also has an eco mode, which is definitely very boring and eco-friendly. I really didn't find it actually gave me very much more efficiency, but it did make things a lot slower and less fun. So I don't really use eco mode that much. But now in the GT, it also has the GT button on the right-hand side. That gives you 2 more modes that you don't have in the other trim levels of the EV6. So when you press the GT button and go into GT mode, that's going to set everything up configured for full send. That's going to give you maximum power out of the motors. It's going to set the suspension to be like real race car-like harsh suspension. The variable shocks will be very harsh. It tightens up the steering a little bit in terms of responsiveness. It gives the brakes to have maximum regen. I think it's 1.6 G in regen that brakes can do itself. Even also sets up the limited slip differential, and the traction control partially turns off as well, puts them in Sport Plus mode. So that's the GT mode. Now, the last mode, which I was very impressed with and really wanted, was a My mode. I was crying for a My mode in my last car, and this mode gives it to you. It's similar to one of the 2 M modes that you have on modern BMWs, where it's a user configured mode. And you can set up any of these parameters, there's 6 or 7 of them, different ones, to be any like the other modes. So you can set them up where your suspension is going to be normal, but the throttle response is going to be GT. You could set it up so the limited slip differential is completely off and set it up for track use. So you can really configure that My mode to be your mode, and that's what I've done. And so that's the third thing that I really dig about this car. So the last thing I'll just say about this car that I really love is the styling. I think the car looks way better in person than you see in pictures because basically compared with anything else on the road, it looks just so different and so cool. Things that I think are really awesome are the daytime running lights in the front. I think they're calling them the digital tiger face. and also the rear lighting, where the light bar goes from completely one end of the wide car all the way across, forming a ducktail spoiler, and to the right-hand side. Both those elements are just like awesome. So that's some of the things I really love about the car. I wanted to talk about the two things which were concerns of mine before getting the car that really have turned into non-concerns now that I have owned the car. So the two things I wanted to talk about finally are wireless CarPlay, which this car does not have any wireless CarPlay or Android Auto. All of them are wired through a USB-A port. And the second thing is the range in the car. So I've actually done a little study over the past month at every single wireless CarPlay adapter. These things, sit between your wired CarPlay car and your iPhone or your Android phone in the case of wireless Android Auto. So you plug them into your car and your car thinks that it's talking to an iPhone, but in reality it's talking to a little device that all it does is speak wireless CarPlay to your iPhone. So this one here is from CarLink Kit. It's their 5.0 adapter, runs about 70 to 80 bucks on Amazon. I've tried every single adapter and I'm telling you this is the best one for two reasons. The first is it has extremely low latency, so no more latency in terms of scrolling around a map, pressing buttons. Everything is as snappy as if you were using a head unit with wireless CarPlay. The second thing is if you have Android Auto, this thing speaks native Android Auto to the head unit, not CarPlay. So your phone will know it's talking with a head unit that speaks wireless Android Auto, and your head unit, or your car, in this case the EV6, thinks that it's talking to a wired Android phone, not a wired iPhone. So supposedly the Android Auto implementation is better than other adapters. I haven't tested every other adapter with this, but I know with my Pixel 7, this adapter was doing much faster than the other one that I tested and was less buggy and just seemed much better. I've driven this adapter on 2 full road trips, each one about 7 to 8 hours. 2 of those trips, or 14 hours of this, was in 107-degree heat, and this thing's been rock solid. Hasn't crashed once, has been really, really great in terms of giving me wireless CarPlay. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to plug this in right here to the USB-A port, and it's going to turn itself on. In a second you'll see the lights start to go on. You see it's already starting here. It's red right now and it's booting up. Now it's blue, saying that it's waiting for a car, or waiting for a phone, and you'll see it's already projecting on the EV6 screen, and it's now connecting to my iPhone, and already have CarPlay up. So that was kind of hesitation number one in my mind, but really hasn't turned out to be a problem. Okay, the second really big thing I just wanted to talk about is range. When any of the reviewers talk about this car, they laud it and say how fun it was to have for the week, but then they say like, oh man, this has really bad range, right? The EPA estimates it as only 205 miles. Boy, I would never get that. I just got to say that this gets about the same, if not much better efficiency than the Mach-E GT Performance. With all the configurability of the modes, there's a way with eGMP cars to get it so that the front motors are actually physically disconnected from the wheels. There's actually a clutch pack in eGMP cars, this car included, that will allow it to not use regen and completely turn off the motors to the front. So unless you're in heavy acceleration from a stoplight, in the special mode that you can set it up for, that's normal mode and no regen, you're going to find that your front motors are not used at all. So you can maximize efficiency. So with those settings, I get easily at least 2.8 to 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour. That means for every kilowatt hour, you travel about 2.8 to 3.2 miles. That turns out to be over the EPA rating, and that's with a fully loaded car with 4 people in the car, the front and the back cargo completely maxed out with a ton of stuff in it. So if you're not driving with a fully loaded car, you're going to see easily over 3.0 to 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour. I was stopping though basically in practical terms in the exact same charging places as I was with my Mach-E. The difference I found compared to my old Mach-E was just how fast this car charges. If you hit an EA charger that doesn't have the Signet Surge, that is a 350 and is cooperative, you can charge literally in about 10 to 15 minutes unless you're at a very, very low state of charge. It just makes charging stops just a non-issue. My kids actually want to stay longer at charging stops because we can't watch a full episode of their favorite TV shows before we get going. Whereas with the Mach-E, I would probably spend like 40 minutes charging the thing up at some of these stops. This one, just not even an issue. So really in both cases, wireless CarPlay and having enough range, I haven't found one issue whatsoever with this car. Of course, if you give this car the full send and you're in GT mode all the time, like I sometimes are, look, you're not going to get that type of mileage, but from day to day as a daily driver, this car is a hoot, and it's been really, really fun to get really low efficiency, but to get a lot of smiles on my face with the car. I tell you, it's not all been rosy with the car. I want to tell you a little bit about the one problem that we've had so far that happened soon after I got the car, and hopefully something that won't repeat again. So soon after we got the car and I drove it back to the Bay Area, we decided to take it on a road trip to LA over the July 4th weekend. We get in the car. It was going to be a heat wave in California that whole weekend. So we get in the car, we have it all loaded up, we pack up, we start driving. About 25 minutes into the trip, I go to my wife, I go like, hey, does it feel really hot in the car? I feel like it's blowing hot air on us, it being the car. My wife answers, yes, indeed, it is blowing hot air on us. And it turns out that the air conditioning in the almost new, under 1,000 mile, bought as new car that I had completely failed. So we were stuck deciding, like, what do we do? Do we turn around and drive back home, or do we forge on and figure out what's going on later on? So we decided to set my wife on looking at the internet and seeing if there's anything we can discern about people with AC problems with an EV6 and what we can do about it while we started driving down to LA. So we wound up taking I-5, which is our normal route, but stopping like every half hour to make sure us and our kids were hydrated, getting water, and we had to drive with the windows down, with it being 107 degrees in the Central Valley. So not the most pleasant drive. We were able to get the car home, it turns out, after the long weekend, and get an appointment at a local Kia dealer the next day to get the car fixed. So it turns out that the car was down for about 7 or 8 days, just because the dealer took a little while to look at it with how busy they were and to diagnose it, and then to get approval to get the part, and to get the part. It took about 2 hours once they got the part overnight to get it in. Kia's paying for my rental car in the meantime, so that's not been a problem. But the car needed a new AC compressor. Since I've gotten the new compressor, everything has been great. Car has not done anything bad with the AC since then. It's been actually really, really cold, the AC. So I'm hoping that that's the last of any reliability problems with this car. All right, so that concludes my quick introduction to my new ride, my 2023 EV6 GT, nicknamed Kimchi. We'll be back with you soon with more adventures, including a lot of accessories we got to install, as well as some road trips coming up. See you guys soon.